everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, Blizzard are blizzarding yet again as a survey has done the rounds in regards to Overwatch 2's potential pricing, and it's ridiculous because, of course it is, because it's Blizzard. Now, Blizzard have responded to this. They talked to IGN, who did the initial report, saying that these pricings for the game's microtransactions are not indicative of final pricing.
Yes.
But we're going to run them down anyway and talk about the state of Blizzard overall and where the likes of Diablo Immortal is at, because that thing's made $100 million in 8 weeks, and there's no way they're not going to carry some of that across into their future business models. So in terms of the pricing that they've put forward, they literally put a survey out just asking people, would you pay these prices? A single mythic skin was $44.99. A weapon charm, just a weapon charm, $9.99. $24.99 for a legendary skin, and $29.99 for a legendary bundle. Do you want some tenor weapon charms?
I really don't, Scott, because weapon charms in every game are the worst bits of tat you can possibly get, and I wouldn't eat. They would have to pay me to put a weapon charm on my gun.
I don't know where they came from. They're just everywhere now.
No.
Keychain for your gun.
Right, the thing is, for this survey, obviously they're not going to. This doesn't mean that they're going to start including $45 skins.
No.
However, it is indicative of them wanting to do that. In my opinion, it's them gauging how much they can get away with. And while it might not be $45, it might be $40, it might be $35, it might be $30. All of which are completely ridiculous, in my opinion. I want to know who's getting this survey in ticking yes to the $45 skins, ticking yes to the $10 weapon charms. Yeah. Like, it is kind of crazy, and yes, going into the story that we're going to get into as well about how much Diablo Immortal has made revenue-wise, it does seem like this stuff is here to stay, and that absolutely sucks because Blizzard is making a lot of money off these cosmetic microtransactions.
An insane amount. So if you talk about how much Diablo Immortal's made, like I just said, it made $100 million in its first 8 weeks on the market, which is an unprecedented amount for Blizzard. It's one of their biggest IP launches, or biggest launches of an IP in their own history. Now, if you break down the statistics, Immortal has, according to the official Twitter account, 30 million users, which makes me think, or makes me realize that they have a whole lot of their revenue reliant on whales, on people who have so much money to spend, that are sort of skewing the how much that this game is worth in the wrong direction. I think it's an interesting talking point because they get to get out there and say, look how much money we've made, look how much people are enjoying this game, don't worry, there's no problem with the microtransactions, etc.
Yeah.
But I think that the amount of disposable income coming from clearly a small minority of people skews the popularity and skews the business model of these implementations, and I think that that is only bad for the overall populace that has to put up with them in the going forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's been headlines since Diablo Immortal dropped about players spending like ridiculous amounts of money on this game. Just this morning, I saw a headline about a player spending $100,000 on the game's items and then getting priced out of matchmaking because they were so powerful that they had no one comparable to be able to play.
Like when Homer Simpson's all gold.
Yeah,
it's just like you can't do anything to me now.
Absolutely, but you're right, man. Like they are clearly targeting a small minority of players who can sustain games like this.
Yeah.
But then we get to this level where games shouldn't just be made for the people with the most money, or sustained by the people with the most money. Because then, as we've heard reports of previously, that leaves a good chunk of the players of Diablo Immortal getting frustrated when they reach the end game and then being on this grind, being encouraged to pay money just to get more out of this title that they downloaded.
It's interesting. Years ago when we started covering microtransactions, obviously this stuff is just here to stay in some form, and we see various different companies try and figure out ways to make it palatable, to make it acceptable, and most of them fail. There's only really the likes of like Warframe or whatever that managed to have an actual decent relationship with their with the audience, and I think we're seeing Blizzard just see just how much they can, like, quote unquote get away with, and then defend it by saying, the core of the gameplay is solid, you get look how much you get for free, before we start monetizing it. I do think it's interesting in terms of how the hell you factor in the whales that are out there, that you are never going to be able to identify. And I think that's an interesting talking point, because years ago I said, what if in the reality of microtransaction spending, the reality of competition based on real world spending, you siphon off the whales into their own playlist? For me, that was kind of one of the solutions. It's like, if these are the people that are literally battling with their own money, and they want to have the whole, I've got to look at how much armor I've paid for and all these weapons that I've bought and everything else, aren't I super important? Don't you just put them all in their own playlist and they fight it out to the death themselves? Have their money battle over there, and the rest of us can just enjoy the game with reduced pricing or whatever it is.
I think that would miss a key point for those whales and for the people who really love spending money on these games, a key appeal of spending money on these games, which is being able to grief the people who don't have the money to be able to get these high-tiered items and be able to trounce people. Like, I don't know, man. From at least my anecdotal experience of playing titles where you have high-level people in similar servers as the low-level people, it's to show off, right? It's to be able to say, look, you don't have this thing that I have. And yes, while a lot of people would still pay into like these games if they just fought other people who paid into them, I think there is a level of wanting to show off, of wanting to kind of create a sense of FOMO, and look what I've got, look what I've achieved. It doesn't even have to be paying money. Like, that's just from regular progression as well. You know, people who prestige all the time in Call of Duty and have those really sick banners and whatnot. You know, it's a sense of, look at what I got and look at what you don't have.
Oh yeah, there is that side of it that is just trying to have sort of just dominate the competition. Look how much money I can spend that you can't afford, etc. But still, the amount of money that Diablo Immortal has made, it's worth factoring into the future of Blizzard's IPs. I did find some old quotes from 2018 and 2020 where Blizzard were talking about wanting to make sure that all of their IPs were on mobile eventually. And we do have the likes of Call of Duty Mobile, which I looked up its revenue to date. That little game has made $1.5 billion to date. But they didn't really shout about it as much as Diablo Immortal, I guess because of just how much money Immortal has made within the 8-week period. Yeah. And considering just how diehard the Diablo fandom is, that it's managed to elevate it. But Blizzard are clearly very mobile focused, and that's where they're going. And if you bring that all the way back to the Overwatch 2 survey, they're seeing, will you guys put up with this in a console game as well?
That's it. It's essentially, this survey to me is Blizzard saying, will you take mobile game practices in a AAA release? Even if Overwatch 2 is going to be free to play, it's still a AAA release that's more catered towards a hardcore audience compared to Diablo Immortal. I think going back to some of the statistics, it's important to note that I think Blizzard said that 50% of Diablo Immortal players are new to this franchise, so they're more casual. This is their first experience, and maybe if they're casual mobile fans, more open to, paying in to this ecosystem. I think Diablo Immortal kicked up such a stink was because it was on PC as well, and I feel like the PC audience, who are obviously less accustomed and less, forgiving when it comes to this style of microtransactions, were more vocal because it was more of a hardcore audience, and I think that's what we're going to get with Overwatch over Diablo Immortal. I think there will be more pushback because it's it's a console and PC release. It's not a mobile game. So. This stuff isn't expected, but you talked about this is Blizzard seeing what they can get away with, and I think that's the approach across the board when it comes to developers and publishers. You look at Warner Brothers with Mortal Kombat 11. When that game launched, it had some really dodgy microtransaction practices, and then they rolled it back. I think all publishers would prefer to roll something back and see if they get away with it rather than undershoot it.
One thing that's interesting in that regard is that we talked about before recording, but there is very much an emerging trend of putting your game out in beta, having the most overpriced microtransactions possible, waiting for the backlash. Yeah. And then if it arrives, then the companies get to go, well, it's just beta. We're just figuring out pricing and seeing what's happening. I think that's the case with something like Multiverses. And I just want to flag that as a trend. I think that the fact that Overwatch 2's beta is launching at the start of October will let them potentially try some of these microtransactions, and then they get to roll them back and go, we listened, we did what you guys wanted, reducing the prices down, which they arguably were always going to do anyway, but the thing they reduced it down to is only the most palatable version of the overblown price that we started with in the first place.
It's like kind of like having someone having like a knife to your throat, right? And then you're like, please don't knife me in the throat. No. And then they're like, okay, I won't. And then they're like, be grateful, we didn't do it. We listened to you. We didn't do that horrible thing.
We've got this fork in your kidneys, but we'll take the knife away. But that's still there. But you had that before, so it's fine. I think it's worth flagging as well that in the overall report as to how well Diablo Immortal is doing, Blizzard say that the vast majority of players aren't spending money at all. So that 100 million figure is still coming from this nebulous, weird minority of whales that have so much money to throw at the game. Like you said, there's that 100k person just having so much money to put into the game that I think skews the whole idea of how profitable it is and the idea of how popular it is in the worst way possible, and it's people like us just trying to play a video game that end up suffering.
I have a solution to this, actually. I think every time one of these high-paying players decides to pay anywhere from the range of 10k to 100k to one of these games, they should just give it to me instead. They should just send it to me in an envelope, like cash, to my door, to the WhatCulture offices, instead of paying for like skins in Diablo Immortal. I promise you, I would spend it better. I would put it to good use more than it being in these game
on a range
ecosystems.
Of lovely hats.
I would get some hats.
Some lovely little hats and some Warner Brothers merchandise. Not Nintendo though. You've got to be careful. But yeah, overall, to wrap it back around to Overwatch 2, this game feels like it's in the weirdest place. Obviously, there's all sorts of different things that happen with Blizzard in reality in regards to the various abusive practices that happen in their offices, but I think in regards to Overwatch as an IP, even from the beginning, it didn't feel like it was necessary. Overwatch felt like a platform that they were plugging stuff into, and then now they pulled the sequel button, pushed the sequel button, and let's do all the unit sales for that, let's do all the marketing for that. And for me, it's all been utterly flat. I don't think they're anywhere near the media dominating feel that Overwatch 1 was.
No, and I mean, I may be getting my Blizzard releases wrong, but I feel like this is their first major release in a while. Obviously, they had Diablo 2 Remastered, they had the Warcraft 3 Reforged game, and obviously they did not go down particularly well, but I don't think they can get away with completely messing up a game as big as Overwatch 2. I don't think that means they're impervious to messing it up, but I just don't think, man, like after, you can kind of get away with remakes because they're not viewed as proper, triple
like the next
sequels.
Step,
they're not viewed as the next step. They're viewed as something else. Kind of like Rockstar, quote unquote, getting away with the definitive edition because it's like, well, it's this other thing. It's not part of the main kind of.
God, if GTA 6 was in the state of the definitive edition,
well, that's
then,
it, man. You know what I mean? Like Overwatch 2 would be like, if that like kind of fails in terms of its business practices, that would be like GTA 6. Failing. It would be almost unprecedented and really spell doom for the company's kind of creative output, in my opinion. Not to be cynical about it, of course.
No, I think at this stage it's just being realistic. I'm working on a whole article about the state of gaming and how various, the general mentalities that we used to have towards gaming of, oh my god, I'm so excited about XYZ thing, tend to get betrayed. So, but yeah, let us know what you think down in the comments below of the state of Blizzard and the state of Overwatch 2 and the state of Diablo Immortals microtransactions, and we'll see how everything plays out. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.